She's just the babysitter, my son said, not even bothering to lower his voice as he spoke to his wife across their gleaming kitchen. I stood frozen, a plate of homemade cookies in my hands, my heart crumbling faster than the warm chocolate chips melting between my fingers. 62 years of life, 38 years of motherhood, and 7 years of being a doting grandmother had just been reduced to just the babysitter. I set the plate down on the counter with trembling hands. My grandson Owen was napping upstairs, unaware that his father had just shattered something precious in his grandmother's heart. I'd been watching him 3 days a week since he was born, rearranging my entire retirement to be there for my family, not for payment, not for obligation, but for love. My son Michael didn't even glance my way as he continued talking to his wife, Audrey. Mom will pick up Owen from preschool tomorrow so you can make your meeting. She doesn't have anything else to do anyway. Audrey at least had the decency to look uncomfortable, her eyes darting to me with an apologetic half-smile. But she didn't correct him. Nobody ever corrected Michael. Not since he'd made his first million at 32 and decided it meant he was always right. I busied myself wiping non-existent crumbs from the counter, trying to steady my breath. This wasn't the first dismissive comment. For years, I'd swallowed them down, tucked them away in that special compartment where mothers store the hurts inflicted by their children. But just the babysitter was different. It was a deliberate reduction of everything I was, everything I'd sacrificed. Actually, I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite the earthquake happening inside me, I have plans tomorrow. Michael finally looked at me, eyebrows raised in genuine surprise, as if the idea of his mother having a life beyond his needs had never occurred to him. What plans? He asked, the skepticism in his tone unmistakable. Personal plans, I replied, meeting his gaze. You'll need to find someone else to pick up Owen. Michael exchanged a look with Audrey that I'd seen 1,000 times before, the mom's being difficult look. Can't you reschedule? He asked, already turning back to his phone, the matter settled in his mind. We really need you tomorrow. Need, not want, not appreciate. Need, like I was a utility to be switched on and off at their convenience. I thought of the trust fund I'd established for Michael when his father died, the trust fund that had grown steadily over the years, carefully managed and untouched. The trust fund that Michael didn't know had never been transferred to his control, because despite his financial success, I'd always sensed he wasn't quite ready for that particular responsibility. The trust fund that, as of this moment, I controlled completely. No, I said simply. I can't reschedule. The silence that followed was new territory in the carefully mapped geography of our relationship. Michael looked up from his phone, genuinely puzzled by this unfamiliar resistance. Is everything okay, Mom? He asked, a hint of concern finally breaking through, though I suspected it was more about the disruption to his schedule than about my well-being. Everything is fine, I replied, removing the apron I'd worn while baking. I just need to start respecting my own time. After all, babysitters usually work on a schedule, don't they? I left before he could respond, gathering my purse and jacket. As I kissed my still sleeping grandson goodbye, I made a decision. It was time for lessons that should have been taught long ago. Lessons about respect, about gratitude, about the true value of family. And if those lessons required leveraging the one thing Michael seemed to understand, money, then so be it. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Instead of preparing to pick up Owen, I prepared for battle. Not with raised voices or dramatic confrontations. Those had never been my style through 62 years of navigating life's complexities. My battle would be quieter, more strategic, and ultimately more effective. I called my financial advisor, Martin, who had been managing my late husband's estate and investments for over 2 decades. Martin had become more than just an advisor. He was a friend who had guided me through the financial wilderness after James died 15 years ago, leaving me with substantial assets but little knowledge of how to manage them. Eleanor, to what do I owe the pleasure? Martin's voice was warm through the phone, a welcome contrast to the coldness I'd felt in my son's kitchen the day before. I need to make some changes to Michael's trust, I said, direct and to the point. The McAllister family trust? The one we've been building since James passed? Yes, that one. The trust had grown substantially, fed by wise investments and the proceeds from selling James's share of his engineering firm. It had always been intended for Michael and eventually Owen, but with conditions. Is everything all right? Martin asked, concern evident in his voice. In 15 years, I'd never suggested any significant changes to the trust structure. It will be, I replied. I need to implement the contingency provisions we discussed when we first set it up, the ones about demonstrated responsibility and family values. There was a pause on the line. Martin remembered those provisions well. They had been James's idea initially, born from his own observations of how sudden wealth had changed some of his colleagues' children. The provisions had never been activated because I'd always hoped they wouldn't be necessary. I see, Martin said carefully. That would restrict Michael's access until certain conditions are met. Are you sure about this, Eleanor? I've never been more sure of anything, I replied, thinking of all the accumulated slights and dismissals over the years, culminating in yesterday's casual degradation. It's time Michael remembered some fundamental truths about family. After finishing with Martin, I made one more call, to a real estate agent. The apartment I'd been living in since selling the family home 5 years ago was comfortable, but had always felt temporary. Now I understood why. It wasn't the right place for the next chapter of my life. By noon, when I would normally have been picking up Owen from his half-day preschool program, I was instead touring a small but charming cottage near the lake, 30 minutes outside the city. Far enough to require effort to visit, close enough to remain part of my grandson's life. My phone buzzed incessantly, first with a text from Michael asking where I was, then another reminding me about Owen, then 3 missed calls in succession. I silenced it and continued the tour, admiring the garden space where I could plant the roses I'd always wanted to grow. It wasn't until evening that I finally returned Michael's calls. Mom, where have you been? His voice was a mixture of frustration and genuine worry. We had to ask Mrs. Peterson next door to pick up Owen. She's 87. Do you know how irresponsible that was? The irony of his concern for the elderly Mrs. Peterson, while dismissing his own 62-year-old mother as just the babysitter, was not lost on me. I told you I had plans, Michael, I replied calmly. And I'm sure Mrs. Peterson was perfectly capable. After all, she raised 4 children of her own. But you always pick him up on Thursdays. The entitlement in his voice was so familiar it almost felt comfortable. Almost. Michael, we need to talk. Not over the phone. Can you come to my apartment tomorrow, without Audrey and Owen? The unusual request seemed to finally penetrate his indignation. Is something wrong? Are you sick? It was telling that this was his first thought, that only illness could explain my deviation from his expectations. I'm not sick, just come tomorrow at 10. After we hung up, I sat in my living room surrounded by 15 years of widow's life. Photos of James, photos of Michael growing up, photos of baby Owen, mementos of a life spent in service to family. I didn't regret a moment of it. The love given had been real and worth every sacrifice. But somewhere along the way, that sacrifice had transformed from a gift freely given to an expectation, then to an entitlement, and finally to an invisibility so complete that I had become just the babysitter. Tomorrow would change that equation forever. Michael arrived exactly at 10, his punctuality a trait he'd inherited from his father. He wore the concerned expression he reserved for serious matters, the same look he'd had when discussing Owen's preschool options or contemplating a major investment. "Mom, what's going on?" he asked, barely through the door. "Are you sure you're not sick? You're acting strange." I gestured to the living room. "Sit down, Michael. Would you like some coffee?" "No, I have a meeting at 11:30. I need to be quick." Of course he did. I nodded and sat across from him, noting how he perched on the edge of the sofa, ready to depart, always one foot out the door. "I'm making some changes in my life," I began, choosing my words carefully, starting with how I spend my time. "Is this about yesterday?" "Look, if you're upset about something I said—" "You called me just the babysitter," I interrupted, the words still sharp enough to cause a physical ache. Michael had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "I didn't mean it like that, it was just a figure of speech." "No," I said firmly, "it wasn't. It was exactly how you see me, as someone whose time in life exists to serve your needs, and it's been that way for too long." Michael sighed, glancing at his watch. "Mom, I'm sorry if I hurt your feelings. You know I value everything you do for Owen, but is this really worth disrupting our whole arrangement over? We depend on you." "That's exactly the problem, Michael. You don't depend on me, you depend on what I do for you. There's a difference." "This feels like semantics," he said, impatience creeping into his voice. "What exactly do you want? More acknowledgement? A thank you card? Just tell me so we can fix this and get back to normal." His dismissiveness ignited something in me. Not anger exactly, but certainty. I was making the right decision. "I've made changes to the McAllister Trust," I said simply. That got his attention. His head snapped up, eyes suddenly focused. "What changes?" "The trust will now operate under the contingency provisions your father and I established when we first set it up. You'll receive monthly statements but won't have access to the principal until certain conditions are met." Michael stared at me in disbelief. "You can't do that. That money is mine." "No, Michael, it's not. Not yet. The trust was always set up with conditions which I've chosen not to enforce until now." "What conditions?" His voice had taken on the sharp edge he typically reserved for business adversaries. "Demonstrated commitment to family values, regular family time, respect for family members. All the things your father wanted to ensure wouldn't be lost in the pursuit of wealth." Michael stood up, running his hands through his hair in frustration. "This is insane. I have a family. I'm a good father to Owen." "You are," I acknowledged, "but a family is more than just your child. It's also your parents, your spouse's parents, the whole network of relationships. And that network requires care and respect." "So this is blackmail," he said flatly. "Be nice to Mom or lose the trust fund." I shook my head. "This isn't about being nice to me, Michael. It's about recognizing the value of family in all its forms. Something you seem to have forgotten somewhere between your first million and your latest promotion. How exactly am I supposed to demonstrate these family values?" His tone made air quotes unnecessary. "That's for you to figure out. Authentic respect can't be prescribed." Michael paced the small confines of my living room. "I can fight this legally, you know. I'll contest it." "You can try," I said calmly. "But your father and I had excellent lawyers draft those provisions. They're airtight." He stopped pacing and looked at me as if seeing me for the first time, not as his mother or Owen's grandmother or just the babysitter, but as a person with agency and power. "I don't understand why you're doing this now," he said finally, "after all these years. Because sometimes lessons that should have been learned in childhood need to be taught in adulthood, and sometimes the teacher needs to speak in a language the student understands." I met his gaze steadily. "For you, That language appears to be money. This is about yesterday, isn't it? One comment and you're punishing me with financial manipulation. No, Michael. Yesterday was simply the culmination of years of being taken for granted. The straw that broke the camel's back, as they say. And if I refuse to play this game, he challenged, then the trust remains locked, the money still grows, but you won't access it. Perhaps Owen will, one day, if he learns what you didn't. The mention of his son made Michael pause. He'd always wanted Owen to have advantages he hadn't had himself, ironic, given how privileged Michael's own upbringing had been. I need to think about this, he said finally. Take all the time you need. I stood up, signaling the end of our conversation. I have an appointment with a real estate agent at noon. Real estate agent? Are you selling this place? I'm buying a cottage by the lake. It's time for a change of scenery. Michael looked stunned. But that's 30 minutes away. How will you watch Owen? And there it was. His first concern, even now, was about the disruption to his childcare arrangements. I won't be, Michael. At least, not on the current schedule. I'll be his grandmother, not his babysitter. There's a difference. I showed him to the door, feeling lighter than I had in years. As he stepped into the hallway, looking somewhat shell-shocked, I added one final thought. I'll always be your mother, Michael. I'll always love you. But it's time we both remembered that I'm also Eleanor McAllister, a person in my own right, with my own life to live. I closed the door gently on his confused expression, knowing that the real work was just beginning. Change wouldn't come easily or quickly. There would be resistance, resentment, perhaps even temporary estrangement. But at 62, I'd learned something important about time. It was too precious to waste on those who didn't value it. The next 2 weeks passed in a whirlwind of activity. I closed on the lake cottage, started packing my apartment, and fielded increasingly urgent calls from both Michael and Audrey about childcare arrangements. I remained firm but kind, suggesting professional nannies and daycare options that would provide excellent care for Owen. But he loves being with you, Audrey said during one particularly emotional call. He keeps asking where Grandma is. And I love being with him, I assured her. I'm not disappearing from his life, I'm just changing how and when I'm available. It was Audrey who made the first genuine overture. She arrived at my apartment one afternoon while I was boxing books, Owen in tow. My grandson's excited squeal and running hug nearly knocked me over, filling a hollow space that had formed inside me over the past 2 weeks. I missed you, Grandma, he exclaimed, his 4-year-old arm squeezing my neck with surprising strength. I missed you too, sweet boy, I whispered, inhaling the familiar scent of his shampoo and the faint chocolate milk mustache he perpetually wore. Audrey stood awkwardly in the doorway watching our reunion. He wouldn't stop asking for you, she explained. And honestly, I needed to see if you were really moving. I invited them in, clearing toys I'd already packed for donation to make space in the living room. Owen immediately began unpacking them, oblivious to the tension between the adults. Michael told me about the trust, Audrey said finally, perching on the same sofa edge her husband had occupied 2 weeks earlier. He's not handling it well. I wouldn't expect him to, I replied, offering her tea which she declined. Is this really about him calling you the babysitter? Because I told him that was horrible the moment you left. I've been telling him for years he takes you for granted. I considered her words carefully. Audrey had always been more perceptive than Michael gave her credit for. It's about much more than that, I said. It's about teaching Michael something important before it's too late, before Owen learns the same lessons about how to treat family. Audrey was quiet for a moment, watching her son play. I get it, you know, she said finally. My mother lives across the country, but even when she visits, Michael treats her like a convenience. It's embarrassing sometimes. Her honesty surprised me. In 7 years of marriage, Audrey had rarely contradicted Michael, at least not in front of others. Michael isn't a bad person, I said, feeling the need to defend my son despite everything. He's just lost sight of certain values along the way. Success changed him, Audrey agreed. He wasn't always like this. When we first met, he used to talk about you all the time, how you kept everything together after his dad died, how you never missed a single one of his games, despite working full-time. The memory brought unexpected tears to my eyes. That grateful, appreciative son had existed once. Perhaps he wasn't entirely gone. The lake house, Audrey continued hesitantly. Is it nice? It's small but perfect for me. There's a guest room, I added meaningfully, for when Owen might want to visit. With his parents, of course. Audrey nodded, understanding the olive branch I was extending. We'd like that, all of us. When they left an hour later, Owen extracted a promise that I would attend his preschool presentation the following week. It would be my first time seeing him in a purely grandmother capacity, not as the caregiver who had picked him up, but as family there to celebrate his achievement. As I continued packing that evening, my phone rang. It was Martin, my financial advisor. Eleanor, I wanted to let you know that Michael came to see me today, he said without preamble. I'm not surprised, I replied, sitting down on a packing box. What did he want? Information about the trust conditions, primarily. He was different than I expected. Different how? Less combative, more thoughtful. He asked a lot of questions about why you and James had included those provisions in the first place. This was unexpected. I had anticipated anger, legal threats, even emotional manipulation, but not curiosity about the reasoning behind our decision. What did you tell him? I asked. The truth, that James had seen too many families torn apart by wealth, that he wanted to ensure the McAllister money would enhance family bonds, not destroy them. I remembered those conversations with James clearly. My practical, forward-thinking husband had worried about money's corrosive potential even while working tirelessly to provide it for our family. Did Michael say anything else? I asked. He asked for copies of his father's letters, the ones included in the trust documentation. I gave them to him. The letters. I had almost forgotten. James had written letters to be included with the trust, his thoughts on wealth, family, responsibility. Letters I hadn't read in 15 years, but whose contents had helped shape the trust's unusual provisions. Thank you for telling me, Martin. After we hung up, I sat among my half-packed belongings, wondering what James would think of my actions. Had I gone too far, or not far enough? Was I risking my relationship with my only child to teach a lesson that could have been delivered more gently? But gentle approaches had failed for years. Sometimes love required difficult decisions and painful boundaries. Sometimes it meant choosing the harder path in hopes of reaching a better destination. The day of Owen's preschool presentation arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully, no longer the convenient grandmother in casual clothes ready for playground duty, but the proud family member there for a special occasion. The distinction felt important. I arrived early, finding a seat in the back of the small auditorium. Parents and grandparents filtered in, many exchanging greetings, some giving me curious looks. They were used to seeing me in my pickup role, not as an audience member. I spotted Michael and Audrey entering, scanning the crowd. Audrey saw me first, nudging Michael and pointing in my direction. After a moment's hesitation, they made their way toward me. Mom, Michael said, his voice carefully neutral. I wasn't sure you'd come. I promised Owen, I replied simply. I keep my promises. He nodded, and the three of us sat in an awkward silence as the room filled around us. Just as the lights dimmed for the presentation to begin, Michael leaned over and whispered. I read Dad's letters. Before I could respond, The music started and a parade of 4-year-olds filed onto the small stage, Owen among them, his face lighting up when he spotted us in the audience. Our conversation would have to wait. The presentation was exactly what one would expect from preschoolers, endearingly chaotic, punctuated by forgotten lines and occasional stage fright. Owen performed his part perfectly, a fact that had Michael beaming with unmistakable pride. It wasn't until after, during the cookie and juice reception, that we had a chance to talk. Audrey had taken Owen to meet his teacher, leaving Michael and me alone by the refreshment table. "I never knew Dad wrote those letters," Michael said, turning a paper cup in his hands. "All these years, and I never knew what he really thought about money." I nodded. "He worried about what it might do to you, to us as a family. He wrote that wealth without values was a curse disguised as a blessing." Michael quoted from memory, suggesting he had read the letters more than once. "That money couldn't buy the things that mattered most." "Your father was a wise man." Michael looked at me directly for the first time since entering the auditorium. "Why didn't you ever show me those letters before?" It was a fair question, one I had asked myself repeatedly over the past days. "I think I was trying to protect you from pain after he died. And then later. I suppose I thought you wouldn't be receptive to the message." Until now." Until now, I agreed. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching Owen across the room. "I've been thinking a lot these past weeks. About Dad. About you. About the kind of father I want to be to Owen." He took a deep breath. "And about how I've been treating you." I waited, letting him find his words. "You were never just the babysitter," he said finally. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded, but that doesn't excuse it." "No," I agreed quietly. "It doesn't. I've taken you for granted," he continued, the admission clearly difficult for him. "I've treated your time as less valuable than mine, your life as less important than my convenience." "Yes," I said simply, "you have." He flinched slightly at my direct agreement, but continued. "I don't want Owen to learn those lessons from me. I don't want him to think that's how we treat family." For the first time in our difficult conversation, I felt a glimmer of hope. Not because Michael had acknowledged his behavior, though that was important, but because he was connecting it to Owen's future understanding of family. "The cottage by the lake," Michael said hesitantly. "Is it nice?" The echo of Audrey's question from days earlier wasn't lost on me. "It's peaceful. The perfect place for this next chapter of my life." "Will you? Would you show it to us sometime? Maybe this weekend?" It was a small step, but a meaningful one. Michael initiating family time without any practical need for childcare or assistance. "I'd like that," I replied. "There's a lovely ice cream parlor in the town nearby. Owen would enjoy it." As Audrey and Owen rejoined us, my grandson clutching a certificate of participation, I saw something shift in Michael's expression as he looked at his son. A recognition, perhaps, that the patterns established now would echo through generations. That the way he treated his mother would eventually inform how Owen treated him. The lesson wasn't complete. One conversation couldn't undo years of entitlement and disregard. The trust would remain under the new conditions for now, its restrictions a concrete reminder of values that couldn't be compromised. But a door had opened, a possibility for change that hadn't existed before. As we left the preschool together, Owen skipping between us, I thought about the cottage waiting for me by the lake, about the roses I would plant in the spring, about the guest room where my grandson would stay during visits, about the difficult but necessary boundary I had drawn. At 62, I was finally learning that love sometimes meant standing firm, that family bonds were strengthened, not weakened, by healthy limits, that it was never too late to teach important lessons or to learn them. The trust fund would remain locked for now, but something more valuable had been unlocked in its place. The weekend visit to my lake cottage marked the beginning of something new. Not reconciliation exactly, that would take much longer, but an acknowledgement that change was necessary and possible. Michael, Audrey, and Owen arrived promptly on Saturday morning. I watched from the porch as their sleek SUV navigated the unpaved driveway, looking somehow out of place against the rustic charm of my new neighborhood. Owen was out of his car seat and running toward me before the engine had fully stopped. "Grandma, you live in the woods now?" he exclaimed, throwing his arms around my legs with the unrestrained enthusiasm only a 4-year-old can muster. "Almost the woods," I laughed, ruffling his hair. "Close enough to see squirrels, but not bears." Michael and Audrey approached more cautiously, taking in the small cottage with its weathered cedar siding and the glimpse of lake visible through the trees behind it. "It's quaint," Michael said, clearly struggling to find something positive to say about a home so different from his own modern, minimalist aesthetic. "It's absolutely lovely," Audrey corrected, elbowing him gently. "Eleanor, it suits you perfectly." "Thank you," I said, genuinely touched by her kindness. "It's smaller than I'm used to, but that's part of the appeal. Less to clean, more to enjoy." I led them inside, watching their reactions to my new space. The cottage was indeed small, just a living room with a stone fireplace, a compact kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a screened porch overlooking the lake. But every inch reflected my choices, not the practical considerations of raising a family or the compromises made in a marriage. The walls were painted in warm yellows and soft blues that James would have found impractical. Books filled shelves without concern for how they'd appear to visitors. My painting supplies, a hobby abandoned decades ago and recently reclaimed, occupied a corner of the living room with cheerful disarray. "This is your painting stuff?" Owen asked, immediately drawn to the colorful tubes of acrylic paint arranged in an old wooden box. "Yes, sweetheart. I've started painting again." "Can I see? Did you make any pictures?" I hesitated, still feeling vulnerable about sharing this reclaimed part of myself. But Owen's interest was genuine, his face expectant. "I'll show you after lunch," I promised. "First, let's get everyone settled." We spent the morning exploring the property, the short path to the lake, the ancient oak tree perfect for future climbing adventures, the small garden plot where I plan to grow vegetables next spring. Owen ran ahead, discovering treasures only a child could appreciate: oddly shaped sticks, interesting rocks, a family of ducks paddling near the shore. Michael remained quiet through most of the tour, his expression unreadable. It wasn't until Owen and Audrey were skipping stones by the lake that he finally spoke his mind. "This is really happening, isn't it?" he said, watching his wife and son from a distance. "You're really starting a new life out here, away from us." "Not away from you," I corrected gently. "Just independent of you. There's a difference." Because of what I said, it wasn't a question. Because of what that statement represented, I clarified. A pattern, a way of seeing me that needed to change. Michael sighed, picking up a stone and turning it over in his hands. "I've been doing a lot of thinking these past weeks, reading Dad's letters over and over, wondering when exactly I started to see family as functional rather than fundamental." His choice of words surprised me, thoughtful and insightful in a way Michael rarely expressed himself. "Dad wrote about balance," he continued, "about how success without connection was hollow. I always thought I understood what he meant, but I didn't, did I? Understanding something intellectually is different from living it," I offered. "Your father and I tried to teach you those values, but perhaps we made it too easy. Perhaps we should have required more from you earlier. Like you're doing now, with the trust." I nodded. "Like I'm doing now." Michael skipped his stone across the water, managing 4 bounces before it sank. "For what it's worth, I've already started making changes." "What kind of changes?" I asked, curious despite my skepticism. "I hired a nanny for Owen, a proper, professional nanny with excellent references. Full-time, well-paid, with benefits. He glanced at me. I realized we were treating you like unpaid help, and that wasn't right, even if you hadn't called me on it. It was a practical solution, typical of Michael's approach to problems. Fix the immediate issue, move on. But it was also an acknowledgement of the problem, which represented progress. I've also scheduled regular dinners with Audrey's parents, he continued. Every other Sunday. They're only an hour away, and we've barely seen them twice a year. Audrey was surprised. I imagine she was. His mother-in-law and father-in-law had always been kept at arm's length, invited for major holidays, but rarely included in the regular rhythm of their lives. It's not just for show, Mom, Michael said, as if reading my thoughts. Or just to get the trust restrictions lifted. I'm starting to understand what I've been missing, what Owen's been missing. I wanted to believe him. After decades of motherhood, I developed a finely tuned radar for my son's sincerity. This felt real, but only time would tell if it represented genuine change or a temporary adjustment to get what he wanted. It's a good start, I said finally. I'm proud of you for making those changes. We rejoined Audrey and Owen for a picnic lunch on the dock, the conversation shifting to lighter topics. As promised, afterward I showed Owen my paintings, mostly landscapes of the lake and woods, amateurish but improving with each attempt. His unfiltered enthusiasm was the purest validation, his small fingers pointing to details even I hadn't noticed in my own work. Can I paint too, Grandma? He asked, bouncing on his toes with excitement. Of course you can. I bought special paper just for you. I set him up with washable paints and thick paper, showing him how to dip the brush and make his mark on the page. As Owen painted, applying colors with abandon, Michael examined my own paintings more closely. I didn't know you could do this, he said, studying a watercolor of sunrise over the lake. There are probably many things you don't know about me, I replied without rancor. Things that got set aside during the years of being a wife, a mother, a grandmother. You used to paint when I was very young, didn't you? Michael asked, a fragment of memory surfacing. I remember an easel in the spare room of our first house. I was touched that he remembered. Yes, I did. Before your father's business took off, before life got so busy. Why did you stop? It was a simple question with a complicated answer. Priorities change. Time becomes limited. The things you do just for yourself often get sacrificed first. Michael was quiet for a moment, watching his son paint with messy enthusiasm. I don't want Owen to ever see his parents give up the things that make them whole people, he said finally. I don't want him to think that's what being a family means. The sentiment struck me as surprisingly insightful for my pragmatic, results-oriented son. Perhaps James's letters had affected him more deeply than I'd anticipated. That's wise, I said. Children learn from what they see, more than what they're told. The rest of the day passed pleasantly. We visited the ice cream parlor in town as promised, where Owen selected a lurid blue flavor that stained his mouth for hours. We walked along the small town's main street, browsing shops that were charming to me, quaint to Audrey, and boring to Michael, though he made a valiant effort to show interest. As they prepared to leave in the late afternoon, I found myself experiencing a complex mixture of emotions: relief at returning to my newfound solitude, sadness at seeing them go, and hope that this visit represented the beginning of something healthier. We'd like to do this again, Audrey said as she helped Owen into his car seat. Maybe in a couple of weeks? We could bring lunch next time. I'd like that, I replied, touched by her initiative. Michael hung back after Audrey got into the car, clearly wanting a private word. Mom, about the trust, he began. I held up a hand to stop him. Let's not discuss that today. Today was about family, not finances. He nodded, accepting the boundary. Fair enough, but I do want to talk about it sometime. Not to argue, just to understand better what you're looking for. We will, I promised, when the time is right. As I watched their car disappear down the driveway, I felt a cautious optimism. One positive visit didn't erase years of taking me for granted, but it was a step in the right direction. The following weeks brought more changes, some subtle and others more dramatic. Michael and Audrey established a regular schedule of visits to the cottage, every other Saturday, weather permitting. They began bringing the ingredients to cook lunch together rather than taking us out, turning meal preparation into a family activity rather than a service transaction. More significantly, Michael started calling me regularly, brief check-ins that weren't tied to requests for childcare or favors. The conversations were sometimes awkward, both of us navigating unfamiliar territory, but they represented effort, his effort, to establish a connection based on something other than practical need. After a month of these changes, Martin called with an update. Michael has been meeting with me regularly, he reported, asking about the specific metrics for the trust conditions. What have you told him? I asked, curious about how my financial advisor was handling these discussions. I've been clear that there aren't quantifiable metrics, that it's about demonstrating a genuine change in values and family commitment over time. He seems frustrated by the lack of concrete benchmarks, but he's engaging with the process. This sounded like the Michael I knew, looking for specific targets to hit, measurable goals to achieve. He had always excelled at meeting clearly defined objectives. The ambiguity of personal growth and value shifts would challenge him in ways that business targets never had. Has he made any specific requests? I asked. He's asked for quarterly reviews instead of waiting for an unspecified period, a chance to discuss his progress and get feedback. I smiled at the typicality of this approach. Michael was treating the restoration of trust access like a performance improvement plan at work. It wasn't ideal, but it was a start. That seems reasonable, I agreed. We can meet quarterly, but make sure he understands this isn't a checklist to complete, it's about sustainable change. In late October, about 2 months after my move to the cottage, I received an unexpected midweek visit from Audrey. She arrived alone, without Owen, an unusual occurrence that immediately piqued my curiosity. I hope I'm not interrupting, she said as I welcomed her inside. I was in the area for a client meeting and thought I'd stop by. You're always welcome, I assured her, putting on the kettle for tea. Is everything all right? Audrey settled at my small kitchen table, looking around appreciatively at the autumn-themed decorations I'd added to the cottage. Everything's fine, different but fine. I raised an eyebrow questioningly as I set out mugs and tea bags. Michael's been making real changes, she explained. Not just the nanny and the visits here. He's reduced his work hours, actually leaves the office by 6 most days now. He's been much more present with Owen. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely pleased. Michael's workaholic tendencies had been a point of contention in their marriage for years, though Audrey had rarely complained openly. It is wonderful, she agreed, but it's also a bit disorienting, like living with a slightly different person. The kettle whistled, and I poured hot water into our mugs before joining her at the table. Change, even positive change, can be unsettling. Audrey nodded, wrapping her hands around her mug. That's exactly it. I've spent 7 years adapting to the way things were. His long hours, his priorities, his way of doing things. Now he's asking for input, suggesting family activities, calling his dad. His dad? This was news to me. Michael's relationship with his father-in-law had always been cordial but distant. They've been golfing together, Audrey confirmed with a hint of amazement in her voice. Twice now. Dad is thrilled but completely confused. I laughed softly. I can't imagine. The thing is, Audrey continued, her expression turning serious, I know why he's doing it, at least why it started, the trust conditions. Does that bother you? I asked gently. That the motivation was financial initially. Audrey considered this, stirring her tea thoughtfully. I thought it would, but I'm seeing something unexpected happening. The actions he started for. Let's call them strategic reasons. They seem to be changing him in genuine ways. He's sleeping better, laughing more. Yesterday, he said he feels like he's remembering what matters. This was more than I had dared to hope for so soon. I had expected compliance before comprehension, external changes before internal ones. But perhaps the act of living differently was affecting Michael's perspective more quickly than anticipated. I came because I wanted to thank you, Audrey said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. What you did was risky and difficult. It could have backfired terribly, but it didn't. The trust was always meant to nurture values, not just transfer wealth. I explained. James and I discussed it extensively before he died. I just never had the courage to implement those conditions until now. Well, I'm glad you found that courage, Audrey said firmly, even if Michael is still working through his feelings about it. After Audrey left, I sat on my porch watching the late afternoon light play across the lake's surface, reflecting on our conversation. Had I done the right thing? Was Michael's transformation genuine or performative? Only time would tell, but perhaps the distinction mattered less than I'd initially thought. Sometimes we grow into the roles we play, becoming the person our actions suggest we already are. That evening, I reread James's letters myself for the first time in years. My late husband's wisdom seemed even more profound now, his concerns about wealth's impact on family bonds prescient. I was struck by one passage in particular. Money should enable freedom, not replace connection. If our son ever begins to value what wealth can buy over what love freely gives, the greatest service we can offer him is a reminder of what truly matters. James had always seen more clearly than I had. While I had been caught up in the day-to-day acts of loving, the childcare, the emotional support, the practical help, he had recognized the potential long-term cost of giving without expectation of mutual respect. The following weekend brought our now regular Saturday visit, but with an unexpected addition. Michael's father-in-law, Robert, joined them, his first time seeing my new home. "Eleanor, this place is paradise," he declared, as he took in the autumn colors reflecting on the lake. "Reminds me of the cabin my family had when I was a boy." Robert was a retired high school principal with a warm manner and practical outlook that had always resonated with me. His presence changed the dynamic of the visit, adding a comfortable paternal energy that had been missing since James died. More surprising was Michael's interaction with him, respectful, engaged, even deferential at times. They shared stories of their recent golf outings, Robert gently teasing Michael about his competitive streak, Michael accepting the ribbing with good humor. "Dad's been giving me pointers on my swing," Michael explained, using the term dad for his father-in-law, something I'd never heard before, and some other things too. Robert clapped him on the shoulder with affection. "Just old man wisdom, nothing special." "It's been helpful," Michael said, a hint of vulnerability in his voice that struck me deeply. My son had always projected self-sufficiency, rarely admitting when he needed guidance. While Owen and Audrey collected colored leaves along the shoreline, Robert helped me prepare lunch, slicing bread and arranging cheeses with easy competence. "So," he said conversationally once we were alone in the kitchen, "I hear you've been teaching my son-in-law some important lessons." I looked up, startled. "Audrey told you about the trust?" Robert nodded, a knowing smile crossing his weathered face. "Just the broad strokes. Enough to understand why Michael suddenly developed an interest in father-son bonding with a 65-year-old retired educator." "And how do you feel about that?" I asked cautiously. "Honestly, I think it's brilliant." He chuckled, arranging sliced apples on a plate. That boy needed a wake-up call about what family really means. Sometimes the school of hard consequences is the only one that teaches lasting lessons. I felt a wave of relief at his understanding. I worried it was too harsh, that I might damage our relationship beyond repair. Eleanor, Robert said, his expression turning serious, you gave that boy everything for decades: love, support, practical help. When he started treating you like hired help, something needed to change. He paused, selecting his next words carefully. My own father used to say that respect isn't inherited, it's either earned or taught. You're teaching Michael about respect in terms he can understand. It seems to be working, I admitted, though I'm still cautious about assuming the changes will last. Give it time, Robert advised. Real change happens slowly, but it happens, and having seen the difference in him these past weeks, I'd say something fundamental is shifting. Lunch was a lively affair, with Robert entertaining Owen with stories about when Audrey was a little girl. I watched Michael throughout the meal, noting how he actively listened to his father-in-law, asked questions about Audrey's childhood, and made sure everyone had what they needed before serving himself. Small but significant changes from his previously self-focused behavior. After lunch, Michael offered to wash dishes, another first, giving me an opportunity to speak with Audrey. Robert seems to be becoming an important figure for Michael, I observed as we sat on the porch swing. Audrey nodded. It's been amazing to watch. Dad has always wanted that kind of relationship with him, but Michael kept him at a distance. Now they talk several times a week. Your father is a wise man. He is, Audrey agreed. And he's been saying some things Michael needed to hear, not just about family, but about balance, about what success really means. She hesitated before adding, things I've tried to tell him for years, honestly, but sometimes it takes a different voice. I understood that all too well. Sometimes our closest relationships develop patterns that make it difficult for certain messages to penetrate, no matter how important they are. When the family prepared to leave that afternoon, Michael hung back again, this time with purpose rather than hesitation. Mom, I've been thinking about Thanksgiving, he said. We'd like to host this year if that's okay with you. Not just you, but Audrey's parents too, maybe even her brother and his family from Chicago. In previous years, Thanksgiving had been a minimal affair in Michael and Audrey's home, often just the four of us. Sometimes with a business associate or two added for networking purposes, rather than genuine connection. The idea of an extended family gathering represented a significant shift in priorities. That sounds lovely, I said. I'd be happy to help with the cooking. Actually, Michael said, I was thinking of hiring a caterer for the main dishes. He must have seen the fleeting disappointment cross my face because he quickly added, not to avoid the work, but so all of us can enjoy the day without anyone being stuck in the kitchen. You and Audrey and Sarah could still make your special dishes if you want. Sarah was Audrey's mother, a woman I'd met only a handful of times despite our shared grandmother status. The thoughtful inclusion of both grandmother's traditional contributions showed an awareness I wouldn't have credited Michael with months ago. That's very considerate, I said, genuinely impressed. I think it's an excellent plan. Michael nodded, pleased by my approval. Then, after a moment's hesitation, he asked a question I'd been expecting for weeks. Mom, it's been almost 3 months since everything changed. I was wondering if we could schedule that quarterly review with Martin soon, to discuss the trust situation. The phrasing was careful, businesslike, but not demanding. Progress, but still revealing his transaction-oriented mindset. Yes, I agreed. Let's do that. But Michael, I added, holding his gaze, this isn't about checking boxes or meeting minimum requirements. It's about sustainable change. I know, he said, and for the first time I believed he might actually understand. It's not about the money anymore. At least, not entirely. He looked out at the lake, gathering his thoughts. These past months have been eye-opening. I've been different. Better, I think. Audrey says so. Even Owen has noticed. I've noticed, too, I assured him. The thing is, he continued, I don't want to go back to how things were. Even if the trust restrictions were lifted tomorrow. He met my eyes again. But I also want to know that you see the changes, that they matter to you. The vulnerability in his admission touched me deeply. This wasn't just about access to money. It was about recognition of effort, acknowledgement of growth, things every child seeks from a parent. Even when that child is a 40-year-old successful businessman. They matter enormously, I said softly. And I do see them, Michael. I see you trying in ways you never have before. He nodded, accepting this assessment. So, we'll meet with Martin next week. We will, I promised, and we'll talk honestly about where things stand. The quarterly review meeting with Martin took place the following Thursday in his downtown office. I arrived early, taking a moment to appreciate the late autumn sunshine filtering through the windows of the conference room where we would meet. Martin joined me, setting down a folder of documents. Eleanor, good to see you. Michael's on his way up. How do you think this conversation will go? I asked, curious about my advisor's perspective after his multiple meetings with my son. Martin considered the question thoughtfully. I think it will be productive. Michael has been doing the work, not just going through the motions. But he's still Michael. He wants concrete feedback, measurable progress. That's fair, I acknowledged. As long as he understands that family relationships aren't performance reviews with clear metrics. I think he's beginning to grasp that, Martin said. The process is changing him in ways he probably didn't anticipate. Michael arrived precisely on time, dressed more casually than his usual business attire, a subtle signal that he viewed this as a family matter rather than a financial transaction. After brief greetings, Martin opened the meeting. We're here to discuss Michael's progress regarding the contingency provisions of the McAllister Family Trust. Eleanor, as the trustee, would you like to start? I nodded, turning to face my son directly. Michael, over the past 3 months, I've observed significant changes in your approach to family. You've made consistent efforts to spend quality time, not just with Owen, but with extended family as well. You've shown respect for my time and independence. You've begun building meaningful relationships with Audrey's parents. Michael listened attentively, neither defending himself nor seeking additional praise, another change from his typical behavior. These are positive steps, I continued. They suggest a genuine shift in priorities and values. Thank you, Michael said simply. I've been trying to understand what Dad wrote about in those letters, about wealth being meaningless without connection. I think I'm starting to get it. What specific insights have you gained? Martin asked, guiding the conversation professionally but warmly. Michael considered the question before answering. I've realized that I was measuring success by entirely the wrong metrics. I was looking at financial growth, career advancement, material acquisitions, but ignoring the relationships that give those things meaning. He paused, organizing his thoughts. Dad wrote about the difference between being rich and being wealthy. Rich is having money. Wealthy is having enough of what truly matters. The distinction was one James had often made, though I was surprised Michael remembered it so clearly. Perhaps the letters had reawakened memories of conversations long forgotten. I've also realized, Michael continued with visible effort, that I've been treating family connections as transactional, valuing people based on what they could do for me rather than who they are. The self-awareness in this admission moved me. That's a profound realization, I said softly. It's not a comfortable one, Michael admitted. Looking back at how I've behaved, especially toward you, Mom, it's not something I'm proud of. Growth often begins with uncomfortable truths, Martin observed. Michael nodded in agreement before continuing. I've made practical changes too, reduced my work hours, scheduled regular family time that doesn't get canceled for business. Started building relationships I should have invested in years ago. And how has that affected you? I asked, curious about his personal experience of these changes. Honestly, Michael said with a small surprised laugh, I'm happier, more rested, less anxious. It's like, he searched for the right words, like I was running at top speed toward a destination without ever asking if it was where I actually wanted to go. The metaphor struck me as particularly apt for my driven, goal-oriented son. Regarding the trust specifically, Martin interjected, bringing us back to the official purpose of the meeting. Eleanor, do you feel the contingency conditions are being addressed adequately at this point? This was the moment of decision. Were 3 months of positive changes enough to justify lifting the restrictions? Was Michael's transformation genuine and sustainable, or would old patterns re-emerge once financial incentive was removed? I believe Michael has made significant progress, I said carefully. The changes I've observed appear authentic and meaningful. However, Michael tensed slightly at the qualifier but remained silent, waiting for me to continue. I think maintaining the current arrangement for a bit longer would be beneficial, I concluded. Not as punishment or continued consequence, but to allow these new patterns to become truly ingrained. I watched my son's reaction carefully, expecting disappointment or frustration. Instead, after a moment's reflection, he nodded. I understand, he said. I'd like to demonstrate that these changes aren't temporary or motivated solely by financial considerations, that they're becoming who I am, not just what I'm doing. His response confirmed what I'd begun to hope, that the process itself had become valuable to him, beyond the eventual financial outcome. I propose we meet again in 3 months, Martin suggested. With the understanding that significant progress has been made, and we're now looking for consistency and sustainability rather than further dramatic changes. We all agreed to this approach, and as the meeting concluded, I felt a sense of cautious optimism. The trust restrictions had accomplished what James and I had hoped, not just compliance with conditions, but a genuine reevaluation of priorities and values. As Michael and I left Martin's office together, he suggested we get coffee at a nearby cafe, another small but meaningful indication of his desire to spend time with me beyond obligation. Seated by the window with steaming mugs between us, Michael brought up a subject I hadn't expected. I've been thinking about Owen, he said, watching pedestrians hurry past outside, about what kind of values I want to pass down to him. That's one of the most important questions a parent can consider, I replied. Dad's letters mentioned creating a similar trust for Owen eventually, with the same kind of values-based conditions. I nodded. That was always the intention, to ensure that family values would be transmitted alongside family wealth. I think I want to be more involved in that process, Michael said. Not just letting it happen by default when he's grown, but actively teaching him what matters from an early age. What would that look like? I asked, genuinely curious about his vision. I'm not entirely sure yet, he admitted. But I've been talking with Robert, with Dad, he corrected himself, the term coming more naturally now, about creating family traditions that reinforce connection and gratitude. About making sure Owen sees us valuing relationships over achievements or possessions. The thoughtfulness in his approach touched me deeply. This wasn't Michael following a script to meet conditions. This was Michael genuinely grappling with questions of legacy and values. Your father would be very proud of this thinking, I said softly. It's exactly what he hoped the trust would ultimately inspire. Michael was quiet for a moment, stirring his coffee absently. I miss him, he said finally. More now than before, in some ways. Reading his letters, hearing his voice in the words, it made me realize how much wisdom I never took the time to appreciate when he was alive. He understood you better than you might think. I told him. He saw your drive, your ambition, and he admired those qualities. He just worried they might overshadow other important aspects of life if not balanced properly. He was right to worry, Michael acknowledged. Without your intervention, I might never have recognized what was happening. Better late than never, I said with a small smile. Life is long, and there's always time to adjust course. Even at 40, he asked, with a hint of his old wry humor. Even at 62, I countered, thinking of my own recent transformations. The cottage, the painting, the newfound independence. We're all works in progress, Michael. The important thing is to keep progressing. As November unfolded, the promised Thanksgiving gathering began to take shape. Michael and Audrey invited not just me and her parents, but also Audrey's brother Daniel and his family from Chicago, and even Mrs. Peterson, the elderly neighbor who had stepped in to help with Owen during those first turbulent days of change. The guest list reflected a new appreciation for community and extended family that I found deeply encouraging. I offered to come early to help with preparations, but Michael insisted everything was under control. Just bring yourself and your cranberry relish, he said during our weekly phone call. The caterers have everything else handled. When Thanksgiving Day arrived, I drove to Michael and Audrey's home with a mixture of anticipation and lingering caution. Old patterns can reassert themselves during holidays when stress and expectations run high. I needn't have worried. From the moment I arrived, it was clear this Thanksgiving would be different from any we had celebrated in recent memory. The house was warm with welcome, seasonal decorations placed with care rather than designer precision. Owen greeted me at the door in an adorable turkey headband he had made at preschool, proudly leading me to the living room where other guests were already gathering. Robert and Sarah were engaged in animated conversation with Daniel and his wife Grace. Their 2 children, slightly older than Owen, were showing him a game on a tablet, all 3 heads bent together in concentration. "Eleanor," Sarah exclaimed, rising to embrace me. In the past, our relationship had been cordial but distant, 2 grandmothers operating in separate spheres. Now she welcomed me like an old friend. "We were just talking about making this gathering an annual tradition. What do you think?" "I think it's a wonderful idea," I replied, touched by the inclusion. Michael appeared from the kitchen, wearing an apron over his casual clothes. "Mom, you're here." He embraced me warmly, taking the cranberry relish with his free hand. Perfect timing. The caterers just finished setting up, and Audrey's putting the final touches on the table. The dining room had been transformed. The usually sleek modern table extended to its full length and set with warm autumn colors. Name cards positioned guests in thoughtful arrangements that would foster conversation across generations and family lines. I found myself seated between Robert and Mrs. Peterson, with Owen directly across from me. Michael and Audrey sat at opposite ends of the table, not out of distance, but to better host the extended gathering. Before the meal began, Michael stood, glass in hand, commanding attention without demanding it, a subtle but significant shift in his usual authoritative style. "I'd like to say a few words before we begin," he said, his expression earnest. "First, thank you all for being here. This gathering means more than I can adequately express." He looked around the table, making eye contact with each person before continuing. "This past year has taught me some important lessons about what truly matters, about the difference between success and significance, about the irreplaceable value of family and genuine connection." His gaze rested on me briefly, a silent acknowledgement passing between us. "I've been fortunate in many ways," he continued, "but my greatest fortune has been the people in my life who cared enough to guide me, support me, and sometimes, a small smile here, correct me when needed." Robert chuckled knowingly at this, earning a good-natured nod from Michael. "So today, I'm grateful not just for abundance," Michael concluded, but for second chances, for wisdom shared across generations, for the opportunity to build a legacy of values, not just valuables. He raised his glass higher, to family in all its forms. To family, we echoed, glasses touching in a chorus of gentle chimes. As the meal progressed, I observed Michael with quiet pride. He engaged Mrs. Peterson about her grandchildren in Chicago, drew Daniel's shy son into conversation about dinosaurs, helped Owen cut his turkey without taking over. Small moments of consideration and connection that might have gone unnoticed months ago now stood out as evidence of genuine change. After dinner, as others moved to the living room for coffee and dessert, Michael found me in a quiet moment by the fireplace. "Thank you," he said simply. "For what?" I asked, though I suspected I knew. "For caring enough to make things difficult." He smiled at the paradox. "For seeing what I couldn't see. For being willing to risk our relationship to ultimately save it." It was a gamble, I admitted, one I wasn't entirely confident would pay off. "It's still paying off," he said thoughtfully. "I'm still learning, still catching myself in old patterns sometimes, but I'm trying." "That's all any of us can do," I assured him. "Try, learn, grow, even at our ages." Michael glanced across the room at Owen, who was showing his cousins a new toy with exuberant explanations. "I want him to grow up understanding what I didn't, that wealth isn't measured by bank accounts." "He will," I said with confidence, "because he'll have you as an example." Michael's eyes returned to mine, a question in them. "The trust review. Our next meeting with Martin is in January." I nodded, waiting for him to continue. "I don't want you to lift the restrictions because you feel obligated or because enough time has passed," he said carefully. "I want them lifted when you genuinely believe I've earned that trust back." The statement struck me with its maturity and self-awareness. This wasn't Michael, the entitled son, demanding his inheritance. This was Michael, the growing human being, seeking authentic validation of his progress. "Your father once told me that the true test of learning isn't what happens when the teacher is watching, but what happens when no one is looking," I said. "I've seen you when you didn't know I was watching, Michael, talking gently with Owen, listening attentively to Audrey, building real connections with her family. Those moments tell me far more than any planned family event or scheduled visit." "So," he prompted. "So I think we'll have good news to share at our January meeting," I said with a smile. "But the real good news is that I don't think it matters as much to you as it once did." He considered this, then nodded slowly. "You're right, it doesn't. Don't get me wrong." He added with a flash of his old pragmatism, "I still want access to the trust, but not at the expense of what I've gained these past months." Owen came running over, interrupting our conversation with important news about dessert options, and we rejoined the larger gathering, the moment of connection complete, but its impact lingering. As the holiday season progressed, the changes in Michael continued to manifest in meaningful ways. He organized a family outing to select a Christmas tree together, invited me to Owen's winter recital with a proper invitation rather than a last-minute assumption, and most tellingly, began dropping by my cottage occasionally on his way home from work, brief visits with no agenda beyond connection. By the time our January meeting with Martin arrived, my decision was already made, confirmed by a Christmas season filled with genuine family moments rather than obligatory appearances. Based on the consistent positive changes I've observed, I told Martin and Michael as we sat once again in the downtown conference room, "I believe the contingency provisions have served their purpose. Michael has demonstrated a sustained commitment to family values and respectful relationships. I'm ready to recommend lifting the trust restrictions." The relief on Michael's face was evident, but it was tempered with something else, a thoughtfulness that wouldn't have been present 6 months earlier. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate your faith in me. And I want you to know that if you ever see me slipping back into old patterns, you don't need to use the trust to get my attention. Just tell me directly. I'll listen. Martin smiled at this exchange, clearly pleased with the outcome. I'll prepare the paperwork to restore normal access, he said, making notes. It should be complete within the week. As we left the meeting, walking together through the crisp January morning, Michael brought up a subject that caught me by surprise. I've been thinking about establishing a similar trust for Owen, he said. Not the whole inheritance, but a portion of it, with the same kind of values-based conditions. That's a significant decision, I observed. What prompted it? Michael was quiet for a moment, watching his breath form clouds in the cold air. I don't want him to learn these lessons the hard way like I did. I want the connection between wealth and values to be clear from the beginning. The wisdom in this approach struck me deeply. Michael wasn't just changing his behaviors, he was thinking generationally, considering how to transmit values alongside assets. Your father would be very proud of that thinking, I told him. It's exactly what he hoped would happen eventually. I've also been thinking about something else, Michael said as we reached my car. About the babysitter comment that started all this. I tensed slightly, the phrase still holding emotional charge despite all the positive changes that had followed. I was so wrong, he said simply. Not just for saying it, but for thinking it. For reducing you to a function rather than seeing you as a complete person with your own life, your own dreams. Thank you for recognizing that, I said softly. I want you to know that I see you now, Mom. Not just as my mother or Owen's grandmother, but as Eleanor McAllister, artist, lake cottage dweller, wise investor, boundary setter. His smile was gentle. A whole person with a life beyond what you give to us. The acknowledgement, so simple and yet so profound, felt like the true resolution of our journey. More than the trust access, more than the improved behaviors, this recognition of my full personhood represented the change I had most hoped to inspire. That means more than you know, I told him, blinking back unexpected tears. I think I'm beginning to understand, he replied, hugging me before I got into my car. As I drove back to my cottage by the lake, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past 6 months. A casual, thoughtless comment had become the catalyst for transformation, not just in my relationship with Michael, but in my own life as well. At 62, I had reclaimed parts of myself long set aside. I had established boundaries that honored my worth. I had created a home that reflected my authentic self rather than just my roles. And perhaps most importantly, I had found the courage to demand respect rather than settle for appreciation. The trust fund was unlocked now, its financial controls no longer necessary. But something more valuable had been unlocked as well, the true wealth of family connection based on mutual respect and genuine love. As I turned down the familiar unpaved driveway to my cottage, I spotted a canvas propped against my front door, large, carefully wrapped in protective covering. Curious, I parked and approached it, finding a note attached in Michael's handwriting. For the artist who showed me what true wealth looks like, with love and respect, Michael. Unwrapping it carefully, I found a professional portrait of 3 generations, myself, Michael, and Owen, painted from a candid photo taken at Thanksgiving. We were laughing together, the connection between us palpable even in painted form. It was beautifully done, capturing not just our likenesses, but the genuine joy of that moment. But it was the title, inscribed on a small brass plate on the frame, that brought tears to my eyes. Eleanor McAllister, mother, grandmother, artist, teacher. Not babysitter. Never again, just the babysitter. As I carried the painting inside to find the perfect spot on my cottage wall, I thought of all the women my age who silently endured diminishment, who accepted being reduced to their functions rather than honored for their full humanity. I hoped some of them might find the courage I had stumbled upon, to stand firm, to set boundaries, to demand the respect they deserved. It wasn't always about trust funds, of course. The specific leverage would be different for each situation. But the principle remained the same. It was never too late to teach important lessons about respect and value. Never too late to reclaim your worth. Never too late to remind the people you love that you are a complete human being, not defined solely by what you give to others. I hung the portrait in my living room, where the morning light would catch it, a daily reminder of a difficult journey that had led to an unexpected destination. A reminder that sometimes the greatest gift we can give to those we love isn't endless accommodation, but the courage to say, I am more than what I do for you. And it's time you recognized that truth. The trust fund was unlocked, but what we had gained was far more valuable than money could ever measure.